The storm didn't care who you were. It erased roads. It erased choices. On a frozen highway, a pregnant German shepherd stood where nothing was meant to survive. She didn't bark. She didn't run. She waited. Then, a 63-year-old retired SWAT officer stopped his truck. Not because he was brave, but because he knew what happens when no one does. By morning, 5 lives would be born, and one decision would change everything. Winter arrived without warning, pressing its full weight down on the forested spine of northern Maine, where roads narrowed, light thinned, and silence learned how to bite. The Reynolds' cabin sat miles from the nearest town, a low timber structure crouched among black pines and wind-carved snowdrifts. Jack Reynolds liked it that way. At 63, he no longer trusted places that made too much noise. The cabin had one long porch, a stone chimney, and windows set deep enough to hold warmth. It was not a retreat. It was a decision. Jack stood just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered without excess, his frame still carrying the geometry of a man trained to occupy space with purpose. His hair, once jet black, had gone iron gray at the temples and was cut short, practical, with no patience for vanity. His face was angular, the jawline squared by years of discipline rather than youth, and a neatly kept salt-and-pepper beard traced the lines time had chosen for him. His eyes were a steady blue, the kind that did not search rooms so much as settle them. People often mistook his calm for coldness. They were wrong. Jack simply learned long ago that panic wastes time. Susan Reynolds sat in the passenger seat of the truck, wrapped in a thick wool coat, one hand resting against her ribs as she measured her breathing. At 61, Susan was slender, fine-boned, with pale skin that flushed easily in the cold. Her hair, a soft chestnut streaked with silver, was pulled back into a loose braid that brushed the collar of her coat. Her eyes were a gentle gray-green, observant and warm, the kind that noticed small shifts in people long before words changed. She'd been a librarian once, before early retirement and the winter asthma that tightened her lungs when the air turned sharp. Susan did not speak often, but when she did, Jack listened. She saw what others missed. They had driven into town before dusk, a necessary risk. Susan's inhaler was running low, and winter storms had a habit of making decisions for people who waited too long. The pharmacy lights were already dim when they arrived, and the clerk had warned them that the weather was turning fast. Jack had nodded, thanked him, and driven out anyway. He had faced worse than weather, but he respected it more now. Route 17 was nearly empty on the way back. Snow moved sideways, not falling so much as traveling with intent, sweeping across the asphalt in white sheets that erased edges and depth. Jack kept both hands on the wheel, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, easing the truck forward at a pace that favored control over pride. The radio hissed uselessly. Cell service had vanished 10 miles back. Susan coughed once, quietly, into her sleeve. Jack glanced at her without turning his head. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Just cold air," she said, voice calm, though her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. Jack adjusted the heater by instinct, the gesture small but practiced. They rounded a bend where the trees leaned closer to the road, their branches bowed under ice. That was when Jack saw her. At first, she looked like a drift that had learned how to breathe. A low shape near the guardrail, dark against the snow, barely moving. Jack eased off the gas. He did not brake hard. He let the truck slow the way he had once learned to let a room settle, without announcing fear. As the headlights closed the distance, the shape resolved into a German shepherd, female, heavy-bodied with pregnancy. She stood with her head low and her hind leg lifted awkwardly, trembling not just from cold but from pain. Her coat was thick, black and tan, dulled by ice and grime, the fur along her flank matted stiff. One ear carried a small notch near the tip, an old injury, clean and healed. Her belly was swollen, unmistakable. She was close to term. She did not bark. She did not growl. She lifted her head and looked straight at the truck, amber eyes alert, assessing. There was no panic in them. There was calculation. Jack brought the truck to a careful stop and shifted into park. The engine idled, a low mechanical heartbeat against the storm. Susan leaned forward slightly, her breath catching. "Jack," she said softly, "she's hurt." "I see it," he replied. He did not open the door right away. Years as a SWAT officer had taught Jack that the first few seconds after a discovery mattered more than most people understood. He studied the dog's posture, the angle of her shoulders, the way her weight favored one side. He saw the thin line of red near her rear leg where ice had split skin. And then he saw the glint. Fishing line. It was wrapped tight around her leg, embedded enough that movement had drawn it deeper. Someone had tried to cut it, or perhaps she had done that herself against stone or metal. Either way, it had failed her. Jack reached behind his seat and took off his jacket. It was heavy, lined, a dark brown canvas worn thin at the elbows. He opened the door slowly and stepped into the wind. Snow struck his face like thrown sand. He crouched, keeping his profile low, and laid the jacket on the road several feet in front of him, palms open as he did it. He did not advance. "It's okay," he said, not loudly, not softly, just enough for the sound to exist between them. The words were less for the dog than for the space they shared. The German shepherd's nostrils flared. She shifted her weight once, testing pain against necessity, then stood still again. Her eyes never left him. Jack moved 1 inch at a time, angling his body sideways, never head-on. He could feel Susan watching from the truck, silent, trusting him to do what he had always done best, read risk without feeding it. He reached the jacket and stopped. He knelt there, letting the cold sink through his jeans, letting time stretch. When the dog did not retreat, he extended his hand, slow and deliberate, fingers spread. She lowered her head and sniffed the air, then the fabric. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Only then did Jack reach for the line. He did not pull. He slid 2 fingers beneath it, testing tension, and began to work it loose with small, precise movements. The wind screamed around them, but the moment itself felt oddly contained, as if the storm had learned to wait. A sudden gust slammed into the side of the truck. Jack heard the tires slip before he felt it. A low scrape, a lurch. The truck slid sideways and dropped into the shallow ditch with a dull thud. The engine cut out. Susan gasped, then steadied herself, hands braced against the dashboard. Jack froze for half a second, then looked back at the dog. She startled, muscles bunching, but did not bolt. Jack finished cutting the line. The last strand snapped free in his hand. The dog sagged slightly, then caught herself, pain flickering through her body like a ripple. Jack backed away immediately, giving her space. Susan opened the truck door. "Jack, the phone," she said, already knowing the answer. "No signal," he replied, glancing at the dark screen in his pocket. He scanned the road, the trees, the white curtain beyond the headlights. No other vehicles, no help coming soon. He stood there, snow collecting on his shoulders, and made the decision the way he had learned to make all of them, without ceremony. "We're walking," he said. He turned back to the dog. "Come on," he added, not as a command, but an invitation. The German shepherd hesitated, then took one careful step toward him. Her leg buckled. Jack moved instantly, closing the distance, lifting her front end while keeping pressure off her belly. She was heavier than she looked, strong, alive. He glanced once down the road. In the swirling snow, he caught the faint impression of tire tracks turning away, the wide tread of an older pickup, already filling in with white. Someone had been there. Someone had left. Jack did not dwell on it. He adjusted his grip, nodded to Susan, and began the slow walk home. Each step measured, each breath earned, the storm pressing close as if it meant to follow them all the way to the door. The cabin went dark the moment Jack pushed the door shut behind them, as if the storm had been waiting for permission. Cold rushed in with them, sharp and insistent, stealing heat from breath and skin alike. Jack shouldered the German shepherd through the doorway, with care, angling her body so her swollen belly never struck the frame. She let out a low sound, not a growl, not a whine, something closer to effort. Susan moved ahead of them, already pulling blankets from the cedar chest by the wall, her movements economical despite the strain tightening her chest. The power was out. Jack knew it before he checked the breaker. The silence had a particular weight to it, the kind that only followed a sudden loss of electricity. No hum in the walls, no faint click from the heater, just wind scraping along the roof like fingernails. "Okay," Susan said, steadying herself against the table. Her skin had gone paler beneath the freckles on her cheeks, but her eyes were clear. "We can work with this." Susan Reynolds had never been physically imposing. She stood just under 5'6", slim to the point of fragility, but there was nothing fragile about the way she handled crisis. Years of managing asthma had taught her restraint, patience, and how to move through discomfort without dramatizing it. Jack trusted that about her more than any plan he might make. He eased the dog down near the hearth, layering blankets beneath her in slow, deliberate motions. Up close, the German shepherd looked older than Jack had first thought. 4, maybe 5 years old. Her coat was thick but uneven, the guard hairs dulled, the undercoat patchy in places where nutrition had failed her. Her breathing came in shallow bursts, chest expanding and contracting too fast. When Jack brushed snow from her shoulders, his fingers paused. Around her neck, the fur lay flattened in a pale ring, a pressure mark that had no business being there, not from a night, not from an accident. Susan saw it too. She crouched carefully, one hand braced against her knee, and leaned closer. "That's not recent," she said quietly. "That's been there a long time." Jack nodded once. He did not comment. He filed it away. He crossed the room to the old cast-iron stove and struck a match. The flame caught after the third try, coughing into life. The stove would give them heat, but it wouldn't give them certainty. Jack checked the gauge on the propane tank by the back wall. The needle hovered just above empty. Susan set a kettle on the stove and poured water from a jug, her breathing measured, controlled. "We'll ration," she said. "Small amounts. Keep her warm first." The dog, Luna, Jack decided, the name settling in his mind without discussion, shifted and curled inward, muscles tightening along her flanks. A shiver ran through her body deeper than cold. Jack knelt beside her, one hand resting lightly against the floor, close enough to offer presence without intrusion. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It had stopped when the power cut, its hands frozen at 7:18. Jack pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, the one he used for grocery lists and reminders, and flipped to a blank page. He wrote the time by feel. Condition: female German shepherd, pregnant, dehydrated, leg injury, possible labor soon. He wrote like he was back on duty, like clarity itself could keep chaos at bay. Susan returned with a mug of warm water and held it near Luna's muzzle. The dog sniffed, hesitated, then drank in small, careful laps, pausing between each swallow as if measuring trust. When she finished, she rested her chin on the blanket, eyes half-lidded but alert. The wind rose outside, pressing against the cabin with renewed force. Snow struck the windows in erratic bursts. Jack moved to the radio shelf and took down the old emergency set, a heavy thing with a cracked casing and a bent antenna. He turned the dial slowly. Static hissed, thick and impenetrable. A fragment of a voice surfaced and vanished. "No good?" Susan asked. "Not yet," Jack said. He adjusted the antenna, tapped the side of the unit once. The sound did not change. The cabin settled into a strained quiet. Fire crackled, wind moaned, Luna's breathing filled the spaces between. Then the light moved. Susan was the first to see it. A thin sweep across the far window, brief but unmistakable. Headlights, distant, moving through the trees. She looked up sharply. "Jack." "I saw it," he said, already moving. He crossed to the front door and eased it open just enough to step onto the porch. The cold hit him like a wall. Snow had piled against the railing, and the world beyond the cabin was a shifting field of white and shadow. For a second, there was nothing. Then the light came again. Faint, yellowed, not the clean beam of a newer vehicle. It cut sideways through the trees and disappeared. Jack closed the door softly. He did not lock it. He turned to Susan, who stood by the table, one hand pressed lightly against her chest, the other clenched around the back of a chair. "Could be someone lost," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Could be," Jack replied. He did not say what else it could be. He took a flashlight from the hook by the door and stepped back onto the porch. He set it upright near the steps, angling the beam outward, a steady point of reference in the storm. Then he reached into a storage bin and pulled out a length of thin wire strung with small metal chimes, something Susan had once hung in summer for the sound. He looped it discreetly along the porch railing and the door frame. If someone came close, they would hear it. If Jack heard it, he would have warning. When he came back inside, Luna had shifted again. Her breathing had changed, the rhythm uneven now, longer pauses followed by shallow gasps. Her abdomen tightened visibly, muscles drawing inward before releasing. Susan knelt beside her, careful, deliberate. "Jack," she said, not urgently but with weight. "She's close." Jack checked his notes, added a timestamp, and nodded. He placed more blankets around Luna, building a shallow nest near the stove, careful not to overheat her. He remembered enough from past emergencies to know that panic ruined outcomes. Another sweep of light crossed the window, closer this time. The chimes on the porch stirred faintly, metal brushing metal in a sound too light to be the wind. Jack stood. He moved to the corner where an old shotgun leaned, not displayed, simply present. He picked it up, checked it without looking, and rested it against his leg. His posture changed subtly, shoulders aligning, weight balanced. Susan noticed. She always did. "Jack," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "Stay with her." He did not step outside again. Instead, he cut the lamp by the stove, plunging the room into firelight and shadow. From the outside, the cabin went dark, indistinct among the trees. The light passed once more, then vanished. Minutes stretched. The wind pressed on. Luna let out a low, strained sound, deeper now, and shifted her weight, claws scraping lightly against the floorboards. Susan murmured to her, not words so much as tone, a steady presence. Jack returned to his notebook, though his eyes kept drifting to the door. He wrote another line. Unknown vehicle. Possible human threat. He did not dramatize it. He did not need to. The cabin held its breath. Outside, the storm raged on. But something else had entered the night, something colder than weather, and Jack knew with the quiet certainty of a man who had learned to read danger that this night was no longer only about survival from the elements. The first real contraction came just after midnight, quiet but unmistakable. Jack noticed it before Susan spoke. Luna's body stiffened, not with fear but with focus, her muscles drawing inward in a long, controlled line that ran from her ribs to her hindquarters. She did not cry out. She endured. When it passed, she exhaled slowly through her nose, eyes open, fixed on nothing and everything at once. Susan knelt beside her, one hand braced on the floor, the other hovering uncertainly above Luna's shoulder. Her breathing had gone shallow again, the cold air tightening her chest despite the warmth from the stove. Still, her voice remained steady. "That was one," she said softly, more to ground herself than to announce it. Jack checked his watch and wrote the time. His handwriting was neat, precise, the kind that came from years of reports written under pressure. He remembered a hospital room decades earlier, the smell of antiseptic, the way clocks seemed to tick louder when outcomes were uncertain. He pushed the memory aside. This was not that. This was now. The cabin felt smaller with each passing minute. Firelight threw long shadows against the log walls, turning familiar shapes into something watchful. Outside, the wind eased slightly, as if the storm itself had paused to listen. Luna shifted, claws scraping softly against the floor as she repositioned herself on the blankets. Her belly tightened again, harder this time. A low sound escaped her throat, not pain exactly, but effort, something ancient and purposeful. Jack lowered himself to the floor a few feet away, careful to stay within her line of sight without crowding her space. He did not touch her. He knew better. Susan reached for a towel, folded it, and placed it within reach. Her hands trembled faintly, whether from cold or emotion Jack could not tell. She was pale now, freckles standing out sharply against her skin, but her eyes were clear, intent. Crisis sharpened her rather than dulling her. Another contraction came, closer than the last. Luna's breathing hitched, then steadied. Her ears flicked toward the door once, just briefly, as if registering a sound too distant to fully name. Jack heard it too, not footsteps, an engine far off, idling unevenly. Then, silence. The chimes on the porch did not move. Jack stayed where he was. He did not go to the window. He did not pick up the shotgun. He knew the danger of splitting attention when life was unfolding in front of him. "Jack," Susan whispered, not looking up. I know," he said. Luna's body tensed again, this time longer, deeper. Her tail lifted slightly, muscles working in visible waves beneath her coat. Jack leaned forward despite himself, hands braced on his knees, breath held. He remembered training exercises where everything depended on waiting for the right moment, not acting too soon. The first puppy arrived in a rush of motion and warmth, sliding free onto the blanket with a slick sound that cut through the quiet. For a heartbeat, the small body lay still. Susan's hand flew to her mouth. Jack did not move. He watched. He counted seconds the way he once counted breaths in darker places. Luna turned immediately, instinct overriding exhaustion. She nudged the puppy with firm, practiced strokes of her tongue, clearing its face, stimulating breath. A thin, sharp squeak broke the silence. Susan exhaled a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Oh," she whispered. The puppy wriggled weakly, dark fur plastered flat, chest fluttering as it drew its first real breaths. Luna nudged it closer to her belly, eyes never leaving the small form until she was satisfied it lived. Jack wrote again. First pup. Alive. He did not trust his voice. The second contraction came almost immediately, faster than the first. Luna barely had time to settle before her body engaged again. She worked without hesitation now, muscles finding rhythm, breath sinking to effort. Susan stayed close but did not interfere, her hands hovering, ready but restrained. The second puppy emerged with less struggle, sliding free and giving a small indignant twitch as soon as it touched the air. It squeaked almost at once, thin and insistent, a sound that cut cleanly through Jack's chest. 2. Between contractions, Luna lay panting, sides heaving, eyes half closed. Jack noticed the faint scar on her ear again, the pale ring at her neck. He wondered, not for the first time, what kind of place had taught her to endure without complaint. Outside, the engine sound returned, closer now, then cut abruptly. The cabin seemed to shrink around that silence. Susan's head lifted, eyes flicking toward the door. Jack, he raised a hand gently, signaling calm. Stay, he murmured. She's not done. The third contraction was the hardest yet. Luna's body shook with it, breath breaking into short, sharp pants. Jack felt his jaw tighten, memories pressing in uninvited. Another room, another night, the helplessness of waiting. He forced himself to breathe, to stay present. The third puppy arrived slower, its head emerging, then pausing as if reconsidering the world it was entering. Luna strained, a deep sound breaking from her chest. Jack leaned forward instinctively, then stopped himself short. Intervention was a last resort. With one final push, the puppy slipped free. Dark fur again, but this one lay quieter than the others, too quiet. Jack felt the old fear rise, sharp and unwelcome. He counted. 1, 2. Then the puppy moved, a small shudder followed by a faint breathy sound that barely qualified as a cry. Luna cleaned it vigorously, urgency in her movements now, until the small chest began to rise and fall with more confidence. 3. Susan pressed her forehead briefly against her arm, eyes closed, gathering herself. When she looked up again, she smiled, fragile but real. Luna rested for several minutes, breath finally slowing. Jack allowed himself to stand and stretch his legs, joints protesting quietly. He poured a small amount of warm water into a bowl and set it within Luna's reach. She drank between breaths, careful, controlled. Jack wrote again, 3 pups, mother stable, continue monitoring. The fourth puppy surprised them both. Luna's body tensed without warning, contraction hitting hard and fast. The puppy slid free quickly, its fur pale, almost shockingly so in the firelight. White. Susan gasped softly. Jack, look. The puppy lay blinking, small and unsteady, its coat a stark contrast to its siblings. It let out a thin, wavering cry that sounded almost questioning, as if uncertain whether the world would answer it. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, a pressure he had not realized he was carrying. He watched Luna nose the white puppy gently, more cautiously than the others, then draw it close. 4. Snow struck the cabin roof in a sudden rush, the storm reminding them it had not gone anywhere. The engine outside did not return. The fifth and final puppy came nearly an hour later, after a long pause that stretched nerves thin. Luna paced once, then settled again, body heavy, movements slower now but no less determined. When the last puppy arrived, dark-furred and strong, it cried immediately, a sharp, confident sound. 5. Luna collapsed onto her side with a long, exhausted sigh, her body finally releasing the tension it had carried all night. The puppies rooted instinctively, finding warmth and milk, their small bodies pressed together in a living knot. Jack sat back against the wall, legs extended, hands resting uselessly on his thighs. He felt emptied and filled all at once. The storm outside receded to background noise, no longer the center of the night. Susan leaned back on her heels, one hand pressed to her chest as she took slow, careful breaths. Her face was damp with tears she had not noticed falling. "She did it," she said softly. "We all did," Jack replied. The chimes on the porch stirred faintly, metal brushing metal, then fell still. Jack's eyes lifted toward the door, but he did not rise. Whatever waited outside would have to wait longer. Inside the cabin, 5 new lives breathed, small and insistent, and for this moment, that was enough. Morning arrived without ceremony, a thin gray light filtering through the frost-lined windows as if unsure it was welcome. Jack had not slept. He had dozed in fragments, boots still on, his back against the wall opposite the hearth. Years ago, he had learned how to rest without surrendering awareness. That habit never quite left him. He lifted his head at the smallest sound, even now, even here. Luna lay on her side near the stove, her breathing slow and steady at last. 5 small bodies pressed against her belly, their movements erratic and earnest, tiny paws kneading, mouths finding warmth by instinct. The white pup stood out immediately, a pale knot among darker shapes, its coat already drying into a soft, almost luminous fuzz. Luna's eyes followed all of them, but she lingered longest on the smallest, the white one, nudging it closer whenever it drifted too far. Susan slept in the armchair by the table, her head tilted back, her braid loosened, strands of chestnut hair falling across her cheek. Her face looked older in sleep, not from age but from effort. Jack watched her for a moment, then rose carefully, joints stiff, and moved to the window. The storm had spent itself. Snow lay in disciplined drifts, the world scrubbed clean and quiet. Route 17 was visible again, a pale ribbon cutting through the trees. For a fleeting second, Jack allowed himself to believe the night had taken everything dangerous with it. A knock shattered that illusion. It was not loud. It did not need to be. 3 firm raps against the cabin door, measured, deliberate. Susan startled awake, hand flying to her chest. Luna's head lifted instantly, ears forward, body tensing despite her exhaustion. The puppy squeaked in protest as her muscles shifted. Jack was already moving. He placed himself between the door and Luna in a way that looked casual to anyone who didn't know him. He did not reach for the shotgun. He reached for the door. When he opened it, cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of exhaust and damp wool. The man on the porch stood just under 6 feet, average build, shoulders slouched in a way that suggested either carelessness or calculation. He was in his early 40s, maybe 45, with thinning sandy brown hair combed straight back, more effort than style. His face was narrow, cheekbones sharp, a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. His eyes were a pale hazel, quick and restless, the kind that measured angles rather than people. He wore a heavy jacket that was too clean for the weather, collar turned up not against the cold but his posture. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, practiced, unearned. "Morning," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled. "Name's Derek Cole." Jack did not offer his own. Derek's gaze slid past him toward the interior of the cabin, lingering just long enough to be rude. "I heard you picked up a German shepherd last night," he continued. "Pregnant one." Susan rose slowly behind Jack, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. Her eyes narrowed, not with fear but with focus. Jack's voice remained even. "You heard wrong. Derek smiled a little wider. Funny thing is, I didn't. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded set of papers, tapping them lightly against his palm. She's mine. Took off during the storm. Happens. Luna growled, low and unmistakable. Derek's eyes flicked toward the sound, then away, as if it were an inconvenience rather than a warning. Jack did not raise his voice. You should leave. Derek sighed, the sound exaggerated. No need to make this difficult. I've got registration, breeder paperwork, vet records. He paused, watching Jack's face. Well, some of them. Susan stepped closer. She was chained, she said quietly, long enough to leave a mark. Derek shrugged. Dogs pull, collars rub, you know how it is. Jack felt something settle behind his ribs, cold and precise. He had heard that tone before, in other contexts, from men who believed legality could erase responsibility. You can take your papers, Jack said, and go through animal control, or the sheriff. That's how this works. Derek's smile thinned. I don't think you want to do that. Gets messy, stressful, especially with your situation. His eyes flicked to Susan, then to the hearth. Newborns, older folks. Susan stiffened, but Jack did not move. You're done here, Jack said. For a moment, Derek seemed to consider pushing. Then his shoulders relaxed, his smile returning, smaller now. I'll be in touch, he said. You did a good thing stopping. Don't ruin it by keeping what isn't yours. He turned and walked back toward a dented pickup parked near the tree line. Jack noted the rust along the wheel well, the mismatched rear tire. He memorized the plate without trying. When the truck drove off, Jack closed the door and locked it. Susan exhaled shakily. Jack. I know, he said. He knelt beside Luna, letting her scent him, letting the ritual ground them both. Her growl faded, replaced by a steady watchfulness. She licked the white puppy once, then rested her head. Jack stood and pulled on his coat. I'm going to town, he said. I'll call Nolan. Deputy Nolan Briggs ran the Pine Hollow Sheriff's substation, a low brick building with one flagpole and a coffee pot that never quite cooled. Nolan was 45, tall and spare, with dark hair cut short and threaded with gray at the temples. His face was long, weathered by wind rather than age, eyes a clear winter blue. He had the posture of a man who disliked cruelty more than paperwork, which made him dangerous to the wrong people. Nolan listened without interrupting as Jack spoke, then leaned back in his chair. You did right, he said. Don't hand the dog over, not with pups, especially not with what you're describing. He had papers, Jack said. Papers are easy, Nolan replied. Care is harder to fake. They drove out to Derek's property by mid-afternoon. It sat beyond the last maintained road, a sagging structure pretending to be a kennel. Nolan photographed what he could from public ground, rusted bowls frozen to concrete, a length of chain worn thin at the midpoint, no heat, no shelter fit for winter. Back at the cabin, Susan waited, Luna resting with her pups, the white one pressed tight against her side. Jack returned as dusk fell, the day already thinning into blue. They're opening a case, he told Susan. Temporary hold, she stays. Susan closed her eyes, relief and fear tangling in her chest. Outside, the wind rose again, but this time the cabin held. Jack sat on the floor beside Luna as night came on, the fire steady, the puppies breathing in uneven harmony. He understood now that the storm had not been the true test. That was still coming. The hearing was scheduled for a morning when the sky looked almost forgiving. Jack arrived early, as he always did. The courthouse in Pine Hollow was small, brick softened by decades of winters, its steps worn smooth by boots that had carried more worry than confidence. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. Jack stood with his hands folded behind his back, posture straight, eyes calm, the way he had learned to stand when outcomes mattered. Susan sat beside him on the wooden bench, wrapped in a navy coat, her braid neatly retied, her breathing steady despite the nerves that tugged at her shoulders. She had insisted on coming, despite Jack's concern. "This is our life now," she had said. "I want to see it through." Luna was not in the courtroom. She waited at the cabin with her pups warm and quiet, under the supervision of animal control. Jack felt her absence like a compass missing from his pocket. Deputy Nolan Briggs stood near the front, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. At 45, Nolan carried himself with the restrained confidence of a man who had learned that justice rarely announced itself loudly. He nodded once at Jack, a small gesture of solidarity. Derek Cole arrived last. He moved with the ease of someone who believed the room owed him space. His jacket was clean, his hair neatly combed, his expression a careful blend of irritation and charm. He offered no greeting. Judge Evelyn Hartwell entered without flourish. She was in her early 60s, tall, silver hair pulled into a precise bun. Her glasses were thin, almost delicate, but her gaze was not. When she spoke, the room listened, not out of fear but out of habit. The case unfolded without drama. Veterinary reports were entered into record. Photos of Luna's neck, the pale indentation left by prolonged restraint, were displayed briefly, long enough to matter. Nolan testified to the conditions found on Derek's property: inadequate shelter, lack of heat, evidence of confinement inconsistent with humane care. Derek's attorney argued ownership, registration, the inconvenience of interference. No one argued care. When Jack was called, he stood, placed his hands at his sides, and spoke plainly. He described the storm, the road, the decision to stop. He did not use the word rescue. He used the word choice. He spoke of space, of waiting, of letting an animal decide whether trust was possible. When asked why he had not simply returned Luna immediately, he answered without hesitation. "Because survival isn't property," he said. "It's responsibility." The room was quiet. Judge Hartwell reviewed her notes, then looked up. Her voice carried no ornament. "Temporary custody will remain with Jack and Susan Reynolds pending final adoption proceedings. The claimant is prohibited from contact. Animal control will continue its investigation." The gavel struck once. Clean. Final. Outside, the light had shifted. Snow along the courthouse steps glittered faintly, the hard edge of winter beginning to soften. Derek exited quickly, his jaw tight, eyes sharp with something that was not remorse. Jack watched him go without satisfaction. They drove back to the cabin in silence, the kind that comes when words would only dilute what had already settled. The road curved through the valley, bare trees casting thin shadows across the snow. For the first time since the storm, Jack felt the tension ease its grip on his chest. At the cabin, Luna met them at the door, her body still heavy with recovery but her eyes bright, alert. She did not bark. She simply stood there, solid, present. Jack knelt and rested his forehead briefly against her shoulder. The warmth was real, earned. The puppies had grown visibly in the days since their birth. They moved with awkward determination, tiny legs arguing with gravity. The white pup stood out more each day, its coat a soft contrast against the darker forms, its curiosity untempered by caution. Susan laughed quietly as it attempted to climb over a sibling twice its size. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred in its ordinariness. Jack rose early, fed Luna, weighed the pups, recorded notes the way he always had. Susan managed the house, her breathing improving as spring edged closer, the air less sharp, more forgiving. Neighbors came quietly, not to pry, but to help. Extra blankets appeared on the porch, bags of feed, no speeches, just presence. Animal control checked in regularly, documenting progress, nodding approval. Nolan stopped by once with a thermos of coffee and stayed to watch the pups wrestle in the snow-melted yard. "You did good," he said, not looking at Jack. Jack nodded, accepting the words without ceremony. As weeks passed, the case against Derek moved forward, but it no longer defined the days. Luna healed. The pale ring on her neck remained, a quiet testament, but it no longer dictated her posture. She moved freely now, scanning the tree line without fear, choosing rest without vigilance. One afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the pines, Jack watched Luna settle beside the white pup, nudging it gently back toward the others. He felt something align inside him, a sense of rightness he had not known how to seek. He thought of the night on Route 17, of the storm that had erased choices until only one remained. He understood now that stopping had not been an act of heroism. It had been an act of recognition. Susan joined him on the porch, her hand warm against his sleeve. "They're going to be okay," she said. "So are we," Jack replied. The cabin stood quiet against the fading winter, smoke rising steadily from the chimney, light spilling through the windows. Inside, 5 small hearts beat in uneven harmony, and a 6th, older one, learned how to rest again. The storm had taken its toll, but it had also given something back, and that, Jack knew, was enough. Sometimes the miracle isn't thunder from the sky or a voice that stops time. Sometimes it's a quiet nudge in your spirit that says, "Stop here, not later." On a road buried in winter, when fear and inconvenience had every reason to win, one small act of obedience opened a door God had already prepared. A mother found safety, 5 fragile lives found breath, and 2 weary hearts found purpose again. In everyday life, we pass moments like this more often than we realize. Moments where kindness costs us comfort, where doing the right thing feels heavy, slow, or unseen. But Scripture reminds us that God works in the ordinary, shaping meaning through patience, compassion, and choices made when no one is watching. If you're carrying something heavy today, let this story remind you that pain is never wasted in God's hands. What feels like an interruption may be an invitation. What feels like delay may be protection. And what feels small may be the very place where hope begins again. If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Let us know in the comments what moment in this story touched your heart or where you're watching from. And if you believe in stories that restore faith, dignity, and quiet courage, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching.